and that we gave you the chance to vote your conscience. And if you don't vote your conscience, I'd like to hear from you about what part of your body you are voting.
Now, if a month before the election it becomes clear that it's mathematically impossible for you to win the presidency because you're not on enough state ballots, do you stay on or do you withdraw?
Well, you remember that headline in Daily News, Dewey wins? Because the polls said he wins. The polls can be wrong. The polls are wrong about Howard Dean. They all said he was going to win in a landslide against his Democratic primary opponents. We're building beyond November. An oak tree always starts with an acorn. And we are determined to give this younger generation of Americans a horizon for a better country and a better world and show them how to do it. Because the older generations have conceded two-party monopolies and narrow choices and low expectations and least worth mentality far too long. American people deserve better. They deserve independent-minded, reform-minded, and diligently minded voters, just the way they are as sports fans.
Let's take another question from our audience here on Justice Talking.
Hi, I'm Jeff Forgione from Washington, D.C. Quick question for each. Governor Dean, what's your position on groups pulling out all the stops to keep Mr. Nader off the ballots? And Mr. Nader, would you consider stepping back off the ballot in some of the key states that were close in terms of 2000, like New Hampshire, like West Virginia? Couldn't you still make your point and reach a certain goal in terms of vote getting without getting into those critical areas that are going to be the difference, Arkansas, Missouri, those type of places?
Start with Governor Dean.
Okay.
I do not think that there ought to be people like David Jones going out and trying to get Ralph Nader off the ballot. I do, however, think that Ralph is playing a victim when he ought not to be, because he is using techniques that get other candidates in trouble to get on the ballot. If you pay people to get your signatures and they get them from Republicans, you are bound to have trouble. Democrats do that to each other to get each other off the ballot. So I do not think this is a conspiracy to keep Ralph Nader off the ballot. I think if Ralph was using the means that he ought to be using, which is tons of volunteer signatures and not getting in bed with anti-gay groups like Oregon Family Policy, then we wouldn't be having these kinds of problems.
See why I go after the Democrats as well as Republicans? They face falsehoods and they keep repeating them again and again and again. The way the system is orchestrated, sometimes you have to have paid signature firms to get you on the ballot. Why? Because the two parties are working overtime to keep you off the ballot. The other thing is this, as far as the question directed to me is concerned, I'm never going to betray, and I'm sure Peter Cameo is never going to betray our supporters, and before the election say, sorry, in few states we're cutting out. That's not the way to build a progressive political movement, and Rome wasn't built in a day. We've got to look beyond November, too. Secondly, people should think electoral college as long as we're saddled with it, and if you're in Texas, you can easily vote your conscience and vote for the Nader-Cameo ticket, because the Democrats are abandoning Texas at the presidential level and, of course, hurting their slate of candidates all the way down to city council. And the Republicans do the same thing in places like Minnesota. We have to get over this idea that only small parties take away votes, that it's big parties that take away votes. And as long as the Democrats are not concerned that in 2000, 10 times more Democrats deserted Gore. 8 million Democrats deserted Gore and voted for Bush, 10 times more than deserted and voted for the Nader-LaDuke ticket. It is baffling that the Democrats will not focus on 10 times more votes that they can get back and whine and carp about a third-party candidacy, and they can, in the process, start registering 9 million African-American voters, which Jesse Jackson thinks the Democratic Party is ignoring.
Governor Dean, when you were running in the primaries, you often sounded like Ralph Nader. You talked about the domination of corporate interests. You opposed the war in Iraq. How do your politics differ from Mr. Nader?
I'm sure there are some. My purpose to coming here was not to differentiate my politics from Ralph. He may choose to do so more vigorously. But here's the decision. Here's the fundamental decision that we made differently. I believe that in the end, the people that I care about are served better with a John Kerry presidency than they are with a George Bush presidency. The whole reason I ran, it partly was about corporate interests, but most of it was about human beings. One of the biggest shocks I got was when I got to Iowa, coming from an eastern state, and found out that working people in this country didn't trust American corporations because they weren't American anymore, that they would sell their jobs and move them to Mexico or China and India and forget about people who worked there for 20 years. If George Bush is reelected, that's going to get worse. John Kerry already has a program in place to stop that. He's even been in trouble with the business community because he called corporations that do that Benedict Arnolds. I believe that there is a big difference between John Kerry. I know Ralph has said some things that John Kerry hasn't said, and I agree with Ralph on some of them. But we cannot let the perfect become the enemy of the good. The stakes are too high, and it's human beings. This isn't a debate about who has the right to be on the ballot and philosophy and let's get lots of different points of view. This is a debate about human beings and whether they have health insurance or not, whether they have jobs or not, and whether we're going to stand up for public education in this country or not. And there's a big difference between John Kerry and George Bush, and I cheerfully support John Kerry because I think he can do the right thing.
Okay, here is a clip from Democratic presidential candidate, Senator John Kerry.
I think my candidacy will speak to and appeal to many of the people who were attracted in the year 2000 to Ralph Nader. I've known him for a long time. We've worked together on many issues.
Mr. Nader, what do you see as the prime differences between you and Senator Kerry?
Well, there are a lot of them. I can just give you a quick list. I mean what I say about getting rid of corporate subsidies, handouts, giveaways. I think we should have a national crackdown on corporate crime, fraud, and abuse that's drained and looted trillions of dollars in the last 5 years from innocent workers, pension holders, and small investors. I do believe in the electoral reform that John Anderson talked about. I haven't heard John Kerry say anything about proportional representation or instant runoff voting. I believe in full public financing of public elections, not putting them on the auction block to the highest bidders, who you know come from the wealthy elite and the corporate commercial givers. I believe that people should have a right to benefit from repeal of the Taft-Hartley Act, so Walmart workers and others can form unions and improve their life and collectively bargain against these corporations whose executives make millions on the backs of people who are making $6, $7 an hour, single moms and others. I also believe that there should be no draft in this country, and I'd like to see John Kerry and George W. Bush come out against it. I also believe we should get out of this war in Iraq, as 42% of the American people want the troops back now. Over 55 think it was a mistake to send it in the first place.
Okay,
I believe in national charters of global corporations.
I didn't ask for every difference,
all right.
but okay.
All right. I'm just trying to make sure that I make my point abundantly clear. Here.
I think you have, and we're going to go on to another question from our audience here on Justice Talking.
My name is Jennifer Ellingston. I'm from the Green Party. Mr. Nader has been the only one who has mentioned the defense budget over and over and over, and the profiteering, and how it's half of everything and straining everything. Our president depends on fear over and over and over. We're told that we're in danger, and of course we're all meant to be terrified. And the spineless Democrats have never said, well, you're overdoing it a little bit. So what I'm asking is, this hypothetical, but if you were in power, either one, would you cut in half the defense budget? Would you go back to the ABM treaty? Would you repeal of the Patriot Act? Would you rescind the FISA Act? Would you close down the CIA? Would you get back to real government? Thank you.
Now, I'm assuming that Ralph Nader would say yes to most of this, so I'm going to turn this over to Governor Dean.
I think it's only fair to let Ralph just have his own word for a second. I mean, would you say yes to all of that?
You know, we do need an intelligence capability in this country, but not $40 billion of mistakes every year. I mean, this is the most bloated budget that has led our country astray and wrong from the time of the Soviet Union to the Iraq War.
I think there are two big problems with the defense budget. One is that there are contracts that get let out, like the Halliburton contract, of course, is the most famous, let out by a vice president of the United States who is actually getting money from Halliburton in deferred compensation. That's a violation of the federal ethics code, even though it may theoretically not be against the law. And the other is that the problem with the defense budget is not entirely its size, it's what it's spent on. For example, yes, we should go back into the ABM treaty. I believe we ought to sign the landmines treaty. There's no reason to do that now that the DMZ is not such a problem as it was between the Koreas. Landmines are a weapon which principally serves to blow the heads and hands off small children around the world. I believe that instead of building the tactical battlefield nuclear weapon,